Well, no. I think from what I was listening from the first panel, it's obvious that all the various conversations through the evening there will be significant overlap across the various topics that we are trying to discuss here. But I'm going to request first Jay and then Alex to quickly give a little bit of background about themselves and what their quick take and overview on this topic is.
Well, first of all, thank you, and a pleasure being here. Thanks to American Bazaar and Asif and the team. I think Venky has said it correctly. I think there's going to be quite a bit of overlap in between what got discussed in the previous panel and what we'll discuss. My name is Jay Sehgal, and I work for the Sehgal Foundation, and I've been at the Sehgal Foundation for about 15 years. First 7-8 years I spent on the ground in India, working in the villages, and about last 6-7 years I've been back in the U.S. and working with corporates and working with the individuals to try to raise funds for the work we do. A little bit, Jane did mention about the Sehgal Foundation, but I'll just go a little bit. Jane mentioned our key focus in India is on the water management. Water is a tremendous need and tremendous requirements worked on in India. We work on agriculture quite a bit. In water and agriculture go hand in hand. So we work on agriculture. Our third area of focus, which is really not a lot of, for a donor perspective, not so-called a sexy word, is the governance aspect of it, because it's more a software piece than it is a hardware piece. People like to see their money put in towards building or build towards a dam or build where they can see what project got done. But when you talk about governance, it's more about empowerment of the people and empowerment of the communities and making sure the governance effectively work at the grassroots level. We feel strongly about the governance aspect as we think when we talk about sustainability, sustainability will come through governance, people taking care of their own well-being, and how a governance can effectively function at the grassroots level. That is the key component. And as I said, when I talk to some donors about governance piece, which we feel is the most effective piece out there, but people are not interested in putting their money or dollar towards that particular aspect. Especially today, Venky said I should mention something about the panel. The discussion with the panel, when we talk about today, governance piece is very risky for many of the organizations to work with as well. You must have heard about the cancellation of various organizations, FCRA. Everybody knows what FCRA is, Foreign Currency Regulation Act. So without Foreign Currency Regulation Act, any organization working in the sending money from the United States to India will have difficulty operating without the FCRA. That means they have to raise money locally to be working effectively. So I think saying a little bit about the challenges, the changing scenario, that is a tremendous challenge for organizations like Sehgal Foundation, and I'm sure this Alex, maybe you will also touch up on that, is a tremendous challenge for those people who raise money in the US and be able to spend a little bit in India. And I think we'll get a little bit more into the discussion of this later on. So Alex?
Sure, thank you. Well, I'm Alex Counts, the President and CEO of the American India Foundation. This is the second year I've been here, and really happy to be back. I've only been in this role for a year and a half, but I began my kind of romance with South Asia when I was a Fulbright scholar in Bangladesh in 1988, 1989. And Jane, thank you for your service to the Fulbright program, which has done so much to bring people from South Asia and India here and bring idealistic Americans who maybe didn't know exactly what they were getting into, sending them to places like India and Bangladesh and to shape their lives. And it began 30 years of association with India and Bangladesh. And I worked with the Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus, still work with him, but worked with him professionally for 27 years and started the Grameen Foundation that is actually office is 2 or 3 blocks from here. And you know, AIF at its core has had a lot of success in this whole idea of public-private partnerships, something that's often talked about, but actually tangible examples that are really successful and scalable are still quite few. And we've had some successes in terms of in public health and education of migrant laborers, children, and in one case, well, maybe I'll get to that a little later, but where in the state of Orissa, working with the state government, and state governments, like here in the U.S., tend to be a little bit more pragmatic, a little less kind of out to score political points, just they want to get the job done. And we helped develop with the government there seasonal hostels to help the children of migrant laborers stay in school. And because we worked with them from day one, we weren't trying to create a parallel structure. Today, the seasonal hostels that keep these children in school, the state government pays $4 million every year to run them, so we're not on the hook to raise that money anymore. And we actually have to raise just 5% of that amount because they've invited us to do quality control on their work. So it's a pretty unusual relationship where we co-created a social innovation. Now it's run by the government, but they want us to report back to them, is it being done well or not. And so this is really kind of magical, and we're very proud of it. And just before we hand the mic back to Venky and get more into the substance of the discussion, I'll say that I feel in a certain way uniquely qualified and unqualified to be here today. I think it's safe to say that I'm the person in this room who is most recently in India, because I was there as recently as 11:30 Friday night. When I got on a plane to come here, I still have the dust on my shoes from being in coastal Gujarat on Thursday. You can check my shoes if you want. By the way, I also still have one of these tags for my luggage. They're still in use in some airports in India. And in coastal Gujarat, where I was in the salt pans, and I was looking at these huge ultra-modern windmills generating electricity, but right below them were the people that work on the salt pans who were living in conditions as bad as anything I saw in Bangladesh in the 1990s when I lived there for most of that decade. And so there's still enormous problems. And even those jobs are going away due to mechanization, but the people that are still there. I guess I find myself uniquely disqualified from being here because I just got off a 15-hour flight a few hours ago. But the only reason I would be here, there are very few people that would have me come out after that, but Asif and Venky, 2 amazing friends of this whole movement, this whole community, I couldn't say no to them, so thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. Well, I think we'll come to that later, but I think it's amazing that Asif and team are providing this incredible platform for all of us to come together and really, despite the beautiful day outside, sit here and worry about and do our part to worry about these issues that matter to us. To both our panelists, and then we will open up very soon. If you look at the giving landscape, so to say, there are so many factors to keep in mind and so many people to please, and it's so many expectations to meet. You have the donors, you have the corporate partner, you have the regulators, you have the state government, you have the national government, then you have the target population that you're trying to work with. So there are all these stakeholders that you need to balance and please and keep happy to accomplish your mission, which is easier said than done. So are there any striking philosophies, nuggets, best practices that come to your mind saying, well, we have done this constantly and this has worked well for us. We have stayed away from this and this is because of these reasons. Any two, three best practices, nuggets, or even a quick example that you can think of, Jay and then Alex.
Well, I think in this, but I mean, you're right. There are a tremendous amount of challenges in getting the work done. I mean, one of the things that we have been able to do, I can only speak about some of the practices what we do, is remaining focused. I think that's the biggest thing that we have to do. We have to make sure that you remember, you have vision and you have a mission, what you are trying to accomplish, and remaining focused, of course, one has, biggest thing is working with the community at the grassroots level. That's where you're trying to make an impact. We talk quite a bit about impact, bringing impact. Keeping that as a focus, making sure that, and the other aspect is you need to keep a buffer of making sure our work that you need to get done is protected from any other challenges that come on. So you have to, it is very difficult to say we are going to ignore the government and work on our own. You cannot do that. And this is a very important aspect that you have to work with the governments, you have to work with the people, you have to work at the state level, you have to work at the national level. And those aspects are extremely important. But the ultimate end of the day, when you ask for yourself is what you got done, is what impact have you, we talked quite a bit about impact a little in the last panel. What impact have you been able to do with the effort that you're putting towards, and how you can increase that impact and avoiding these other challenges that come along the way. And that has been the biggest success. I think that's the biggest success for us. We have been, our starting out model was, when we started out, we said we are going to develop those models which we can replicate and implement much easier in the longer run. And we did not look for any donor. That was the key aspect, because a lot of donors are not very interested in funding models, for example. If you want to go out and develop a model, not a lot of money is available for that particular purpose. We were a little fortunate in that aspect that the family had the money to do that initial development stage where we tried various different aspects how we can implement it. Once we have perfected some of these models, it's easier to port it or take it to the other places to implement in a larger way. So I think from that aspect we have been a little bit success, and I think that's, as I said, we are a little fortunate in that aspect that since we have the fund money to do that model development aspect of it. And then it became easier for us for implementation when you take it to the corporates and take it to for the fundraising apps. I said, here's something that works and has an impact, and let's join hands and work together. Now, just quickly on that particular aspect, we make sure that the overheads, we talked about some 15% overheads, we try to keep our overheads as minimal as possible so the corporates and the donors know their 100% or at least 95% of their money is going towards that project and not going taking over our overheads. So I think those are some of the key things that we have been able to do in that particular aspect. Those challenges, of course, without challenges, it'll be life will be very boring, I think, so we need to face those challenges, overcome the challenges, and let the work speak for itself. I think that's the biggest thing that success one can have.
Thank you.
Sure. When we think about the philanthropic landscape in India and other countries in the world, I think we have to realize there's certain things that are out of our control, that are just environmental, that we have to react to, and other things that we have control over and we can be proactive, and both are important. In terms of the environment, again, having just been there myself, I'd say that the federal government that's now been in power for I guess 2.5, 3 years, something like that. It seems like they're trying to tackle a lot of the human development issues in a serious way. They're having some successes. Some things are bogging down. That's inevitable. The CSR money is coming into the sector with strings attached, definitely. Often money that's being programmed into areas that are already advantaged and not going to places that are disadvantaged. But this is the system working. This is the new money is just finding its way to areas of some need. The government at the same time is keeping the NGO sector a little bit off balance at times, and not certainly welcoming anyone, NGOs or others, who are drawing attention to the fact that massive poverty remains in India despite all the progress in the last couple decades, and certainly not welcoming advocacy. And yet at the same time, advocacy, maybe we should use another name, it's tremendously important that NGOs and any actor that has gained insights about what works in combating poverty, to use those insights to influence the whole ecosystem, including government, including businesses, including the media, including academia, to keep the NGO sector in India is sitting on enormous amounts of data and insights, and we shouldn't be shy about talking about them. Again, confrontational advocacy is not something that is a part of our strategy at AF, but leveraging those insights, I think, is very important. But in general, at the federal level, I just tell most people, kind of forget about it. As I often say in this country these days, but that's another story. But the action is really at the state level, right? And I was just talking about our success with LAMP, the Learning and Migration Program, where we partner with willing state governments, with many families that do migration, distressed migration for economic purposes. We also have had a huge success in the public health sphere, first in Jharkhand and now in 3 other states, training up these underutilized resources of accredited social health activists or community health workers in maternal and child health, and just giving them the basic support that they should have gotten when they were placed in these roles, decreasing child mortality by almost 50%. No magic, no technology, just really execution, and then having government step in and own that, and it helps to involve them at the first level. But I think there are other levels that we can, as an NGO sector, philanthropic sector, be more proactive. And I want to talk about a concept that I haven't even heard of until about 6 months ago, which is called collective impact. And just one of the classic cases, if you'll indulge me for a moment, in Cincinnati, there were dozens and dozens of organizations working on public education, all of them having their little niche and doing their little thing in a couple of schools, telling donors that they had a unique insight and the other organizations competing for money weren't really doing that good a job. And at some point, they all came together and said, why don't we actually form a kind of a team to try to improve public education in Cincinnati? And why don't we speak well of the different strategies that each of us use? And why don't we try to set some collective goals and then organize ourselves to reach them, playing to our strengths? And it really revolutionized the education sector in Cincinnati. It didn't solve all the problems. And 1 year ago at this seminar, I kind of outlined, although I hadn't heard that term yet, I was behind on my reading of the philanthropy literature, but I talked about what that could look like in the India philanthropic sector and the people who raise money here, if we did it more as a kind of a team sport. And I have to say that in the years since, there have been some very positive developments, and that idea has been has been received well. There's some stirrings here. And I just very recently, there was a meeting held among leaders of philanthropic organizations focused on India. I'm tempted to name the organization, but one of the largest and most respected organizations in our field had an almost impossible job of sending their 2 top people to this meeting. They had gala in Boston on one night before, and they had a gala in DC the night of, and there was a very tiny window when they could join us, and they did join us. Mangled their schedule like I could not imagine to be there, and it was a real indication that there's a desire to think about this idea of collective impact. What if the large organizations, what if the Prathams and the Akshay Patras and the Magic Bus and the Eccles were to all do their individual things, but to do it as a team and to realize that we're not going to defeat poverty in India by all of us doing what we do in isolation and just trying to carve up the same pie, but a little bit more to our advantage. But let's grow the pie, and let's, in how we raise money and how we use that money in India, let's do it in a little bit more of a collaborative way. I think there's a huge opportunity there, and I think people are beginning to step up to it.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Alex. I think several interesting elements came out, and I think Jay talked about an issue that many organizations struggle with, which is how do you retain the focus when there are so many diverse issues to tackle. Even though you're focused on agriculture or water, there are so many interconnected issues that surface, and you're pulled in different directions. So Jay raised a very important point that many organizations struggle with on a day-to-day basis, the issue of focus. I think Alex also raised the very tactical and strategic aspect of working at the state level and partnerships at the state government and so on and so forth, and the very I would almost say, quite a radical idea of India-centric organizations coming together towards greater collective impact. I know there are so many stalwarts in the room working on so many important issues in their own unique ways. So I just want to take this chance to use the next 10-15 minutes to invite the audience to both quickly react and raise any questions. My only request is keep the questions succinct and your comments very succinct so that we can have more people engaged. Thank you. Any comments, reactions, questions? Geers.
I think it should be very easy to collaborate as Sehgal Foundation works on governance, water, agriculture. Does not work specifically in schools. What stops Sehgal Foundation to invite anybody who's good in education and schools to say, hey, we already been here for 15 years in this area. You've got a flying platform. We get you started, introduced, and get it going much faster. And you know, the NGO that does education in a different region can invite Sehgal Foundation come in and work on agriculture, water, and governance.
Thank you, Geet. I think it's a good point you make. It's like, you know, almost like who will bell the cat kind of a situation, because everybody is doing very effective work in their specific niche areas, but where is the synergy and where is the collaboration, and how do you actually make it actionable? And that was the intention is there, but how do you make it actionable? But good point you raised. Thank you, Geet.
I just have a comment, though. I think Sehgal Foundation does an astounding, amazing job, and I think we should all give them a big round of applause.
So Jay, I was speaking at a conference last year, earlier this year, and it was about, part of it was about charity and philanthropy and how to spend money and how to make sure it's being spent wisely. And anyways, very intelligent people in the room. And one guy stood up and asked me a question that I didn't know how to answer. I thought I knew everything about everything in the world, and I didn't know how to answer it. So I thought today I'd ask you, so next time somebody asks me, I can repeat your answer. So the question is, and since you have hands-on experience in India, the question is, if somebody gives you free, unattached $1 billion to spend in charity in India, what would you do?
I think it's a very good question, and I think there's the tremendous need, the work. There's, as we know, 640,000 villages in India. We have 60% of population living in the rural areas. Now, I think what answer lies in how do you utilize those funds effectively to make sure there's a positive impact in the lives of the people. India is a vast country. There's language barriers, there's this barrier, there's that barrier. How do you make sure that your 1 billion is going to go for the purpose for that you have defined? One of the things that Alex mentioned is, first of all, you have to join hands with others. You cannot do it yourself. There's no organization, no individual that you can go say, we can do it all ourselves. You have to join hands. As I said, India is a vast country. There's barriers in the language. There's a social changes, social barriers. So how do you make sure you join hands? Then the biggest challenge in the collaborative philanthropy or collaborative work is, how do you find those good organizations that have a similar, not the vision or mission, but what I'm trying to basically say is that they are honest and they want to work, and not, I'm talking about dishonesty. We know very well there's so many non-profit organizations in India not doing that work that they are supposed to be doing. But finding those good organizations, that 10% organizations throughout the country, it is a difficult and challenging task. But this is something, the first thing that one needs to do. How do you collaborate and how do you work with others to make sure the thing gets done? then we fully believe, which we started, when the Sehgal Foundation started out, we started out working on holistic approach to development of a village. If you address water, you have challenges in education. If you address education, you have challenges in income generation. You have so how do you, the holistic approach, and again I mentioned very clearly is that sustainability has to be the top of the line. You cannot just be in every village, or any organization can be in a village for long period of time. So how do you make it so that you can walk away from the village and it will sustain the development or the process that you got started? And that's where we feel, again, coming back to the governance piece, saying that governance has to be functionally, effectively at the grassroots level to make sure the development process that you have started is going to retain for the future. So to answer your question, sir, I think it's a very good question, but I think the holistic approach, joining hands with other, use the specialty of every organization. Not one organization can do everything. We can do the water, agriculture, governance. We can have American India Foundation working with us on that particular education perspective. Bringing health organization can work on health. So that's how you make a consortium partners to do the implementation process, and that's how I would answer that question.
You had a few minutes to think about it, so.
Sure. Well, again, I think this has been an excellent dialogue. Let me start by saying something a little controversial, and maybe wake a couple of you up in the back. I think that the generosity of the Indian diaspora and many Indians in India is quite astounding and impressive. Some great people on my board and the boards of other adjacent organizations. I have to say, though, this kind of focus, even obsession on the overhead, seems to be kind of stuck in a 1970s time warp in terms of philanthropy. And let me just put it this way. I mean, American India Foundation, we get 3 stars out of 4 for Charity Navigator financial efficiency. We get 4 stars out of 4 on transparency and accountability, which I think is even more important. But I was just flying, as you know, for 15 hours. Would you want to fly an airline that has a very low percentage spent on maintenance and safety and their overhead? I think you wouldn't. I think you'd actually want to fly on an airline that actually invests in their systems so they don't make mistakes. Or let me ask you something else. What if you were debating whether to go to dinner at McDonald's or a fine dining restaurant? Would your only way of looking at that, deciding, would be, what does it cost per ounce of food that you're getting from McDonald's versus a fine dining restaurant? Of course you wouldn't, because you know that the quality of food is different. So you would look at the cost, but you would also look at what is that cost getting you, because not all NGOs, not all restaurants, not all airlines produce the same amount of good or same amount of product. So let's see if we can move a little bit beyond that, or at least keep that only one of the things that we're looking at, would be my request as we think a little bit more holistically about philanthropy. In terms of this idea of collaboration, I think that in principle we're all for it, but we also have to begin to realize that there's a retraining of our minds. Those of us have been so dedicated to a single organization, we get a kind of a monofocus. We're continually looking to see, how do we evangelize for, how do we position the organization that we're dedicated to for success? And that is fine. We should do that. But we also have to kind of create some space in our mind, in our advocacy, for the movement, the larger movement that we're all part of. And if we can do that, then I think we give a more coherent message, because many of the people here are supportive of multiple organizations. And so one small thing that I did in this spirit of not just speaking for a single organization, but for a movement, is that starting this January at our galas for American India Foundation, I would always say something roughly along these lines, that I said, if you're here at our gala, and you're also a supporter of wonderful organizations like Pratham and Akshaya Patra, and Magic Bus and ECHO, I salute you for doing that as well. and I honor you, because these organizations are our allies and our friends, and we're not going to reach the goals that we've set unless all of us thrive. And so it's a simple thing. It's 2 or 3 sentences in what might be a 10-minute talk, but it's, again, trying to retrain our minds, advance the organization, but advance the larger movement, the collective that we're part of, that, again, without us all thriving, we're never going to get to where we need to go.
Thank you again.